It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't some big cinematic collapse, no dramatic screaming, no final slamming door. It was quieter than that, slower, like a ceiling drip in the middle of the night that keeps you awake but doesn't flood the room until weeks later. I was sitting at my desk one night last June. It was late. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. My office was silent except for the hum of the monitor and the soft tapping of my fingers. Not on the keyboard, just on the desk. I wasn't working. I was just there, staring, thinking, or maybe not even thinking, just drowning in noise that lived inside my own head. My startup was bleeding cash. Investors had stopped responding. The team was tense. I could feel it even in their Slack messages. And at home, my marriage was wrecking in ways I didn't have the words for. We weren't yelling, we were simply drifting, becoming strangers under the same roof. There were days I didn't know who I was building the company for anymore. Myself, my wife, my late mother, whose face I hadn't seen in years, but whose absence weighed heavier than any market metric. I'd always thought of myself as resilient, gritty. But this was different. This wasn't just a rough patch, it was erosion. Something deep inside me was wearing away, grain by grain. I was exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. Some mornings I'd wake up and stare at the ceiling, my chest heavy, unable to move. The alarm would ring and I'd hit snooze, not because I was tired, but because I couldn't face the day. I'd lie there tracing cracks in the plaster and wondering if I was becoming one of those people I used to feel sorry for, people who gave up. But here's the strange thing about rock bottom. You don't always know. You're there until you've been sitting in the dark long enough to forget there was ever light. At one point, I remember looking in the mirror. My face had changed. My eyes looked older, hollow almost. My shoulders curled forward, like I was trying to make myself smaller. I looked like a man waiting for a verdict, and I didn't even know what trial I was being judged in. The worst part wasn't the problems themselves. It wasn't the emails I couldn't answer, or the pitch decks I couldn't finish, or the dinners that ended in silence. It was the feeling of helplessness. I didn't know how to fix anything. I was supposed to lead a company. I couldn't even lead myself out of bed. I felt like a failure. As a founder, as a husband, as a son. And then one day, God knows why I typed a sentence into Google. I don't even remember what exactly it was. Something like how to keep going when everything is falling apart. That search didn't lead me to a motivational video. It didn't show me some productivity hack or morning routine checklist. It led me to a quote. Just one sentence. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius. I read it twice, 3 times. I didn't understand it, not really, but something about it held me. It felt like a rope thrown into the well I didn't know I was trapped in. I clicked the link, then another. I fell down a rabbit hole of old wisdom, Roman emperors, and ancient letters. Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus. Their names felt like stone solid grounded, and their words, it was like they were speaking directly to me across centuries. I wasn't healed in a day. Nothing changed right away. My wife still slept with her back turned to me. The business was still in free fall, but something inside me shifted. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. I felt seen, understood. That was the beginning. Not of a solution, but of a way of seeing. A path through the fire, even if I had no idea how long it would burn. I think a lot of people expect transformation to feel like a lightning strike, sudden, dramatic, immediate. But mine didn't come like that. It came like a whisper, a line on a page. A man who died nearly 2,000 years ago reminding me that I still had control over something. That night, I wrote down the quote on a post-it note and stuck it to my monitor. It's still there, faded now. But every time I look at it, I remember the moment I stopped spiraling. The moment I stopped believing the lie that everything had to be fixed for me to keep going. Because the truth is, rock bottom isn't the end. Sometimes it is just the ground you finally learn to stand on. There's a kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It's not the quiet of a still morning or a gentle night. It's the silence that follows disappointment. The silence after an argument that left too much unsaid. The silence when your phone doesn't ring, not because people are busy, but because they've stopped checking in. That kind of silence is loud, deafening even. I remember nights when I'd walk into my apartment, open the door, and immediately hear nothing. No laughter, no questions like, "How was your day?" The air just sat there stale. Sometimes she'd be in the other room, and we'd exchange a few tired words more out of habit than care. Other times, the apartment was empty, and I'd realize I hadn't talked to a real human being in over 24 hours. But I wasn't truly alone, because in that quiet, something else spoke. It was the voice I'd been trying to drown out for months. The one that whispered, "You're not enough. You ruined this. Everyone sees through you." I tried to distract myself, email news feeds, investor updates, podcasts. But silence always found its way back in. And with it, the noise inside my head returned louder. It was like my own thoughts had become my worst enemy. And no matter how many tasks I completed or how busy I kept myself, they were always waiting. This is where Stoicism began to take root. Not in some grand intellectual breakthrough, but in this very experience, the realization that my suffering was coming more from my own thoughts than from the actual events of my life. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That hit me hard. I had heard that sentiment before, but never felt its truth until now. I started noticing how much I narrated my life in my head, and how that narration was overwhelmingly negative. I wasn't just experiencing setbacks, I was interpreting them as signs of my inadequacy. I wasn't just noticing my marriage was in trouble, I was blaming myself entirely. I wasn't just seeing my company struggle, I was labeling myself a fraud. And here's the thing, the mind is incredibly convincing. The stories it tells become your reality if you don't question them. So I began to ask, is this true? Is it absolutely true that I'm a failure, that I'm unlovable, that this is the end? No, those were just stories, emotional reactions, shadows on the wall. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." That became another post-it on my desk, bright yellow, impossible to miss. I started to catch the voice. When it would say, "You blew your one shot," I'd pause. I wouldn't fight it. I'd just listen. Then I'd respond, not out loud, but inwardly. "No, this is a chapter, not the book." The silence didn't go away, but it changed color. It became less hostile, more like a teacher. It showed me the parts of myself I had been afraid to face: the guilt, the shame, the insecurity. It was brutal, but necessary. Some nights I'd sit on the floor with my back against the couch, breathing deeply, no music, no phone. Just me and the silence. And I'd ask myself questions. What am I feeling? Why does this hurt so much? What's beneath the fear? I was beginning to do something Stoics talk about often, turning inward. Building what Marcus Aurelius called the inner citadel, a place inside you that no external circumstance can touch. But to do that, I had to get through the noise. I had to be brave enough to listen to what was already inside. I started journaling not just tasks or goals, but real thoughts, ugly ones, desperate ones. and slowly some clarity began to emerge. Not answers exactly, but awareness. Awareness that I had allowed my thoughts to spiral unchecked for too long. That I had let silence become a weapon instead of a mirror. One night, during a particularly low moment, I wrote this in my journal. Tonight I realized the war isn't out there, it's in here. And I've been losing because I never stopped to see who I was fighting. That line stayed with me. I was finally waking up to the reality that life's chaos wasn't just happening to me, it was also happening inside me. And until I learned to quiet that inner storm, no amount of external control would make me feel safe or strong. The more I read from the Stoics, the more I understood this wasn't just philosophy, it was survival. Their teachings were battle-tested wisdom for minds under siege. Marcus Aurelius dealt with heartbreak, betrayal, and grief. And yet he wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." That seemed impossible at first. My soul felt like a construction site. But that was the path. That was the challenge. To build that peace from within, not wait for the world to hand it to me. I stopped expecting the silence to be filled by others. I stopped waiting for validation from texts, emails, praise. And slowly, like clearing fog, I began to hear something else. Beneath the noise, beneath the panic, a quieter, steadier voice. One that said, "You're still here. You're still breathing. Let's take the next step." And sometimes that's all it took. Not a leap, just the next step. I didn't go looking for philosophy. I went looking for help. Not therapy, not advice, just something. Anything that could help me stay afloat. At that point, I wasn't trying to thrive, I was just trying to survive without drowning in the weight of it all. It was a cold evening in February. I remember because I hadn't opened the blinds all day. The room was dim lit only by the blue glow of my laptop screen. My inbox was overflowing. Unread investor emails, employee concerns, calendar notifications that I had been ignoring for days. But I wasn't clicking any of them. Instead, I typed into Google, "How to stay calm when your life is falling apart." That sentence changed everything. The search results weren't what I expected. There were articles, sure, some self-help blogs, a few mental health links, but then something caught my eye, a quote from Marcus Aurelius. I'd heard the name before, but only vaguely: Roman emperor, philosopher, something from college I'd half forgotten. But the quote hit like a hammer. "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." I sat back in my chair, rereading it slowly. Power over your mind, not the world. It wasn't just a motivational one-liner. It was a challenge, a confrontation, a call to responsibility. I clicked the link. It led to more quotes, more passages. Then I found myself reading from Meditations, a private journal Marcus never meant to publish. The words were direct, clear, painfully honest. There was no fluff, no fake optimism. Just a man talking to himself, trying to hold himself together in the face of immense pressure. I was hooked. That night, I read until the battery died on my laptop. I scribbled notes on a legal pad, thoughts, phrases, ideas that felt more real than anything I'd heard in months. This wasn't about manifesting a better life or chasing success. It was about enduring life with dignity, about choosing how to respond when everything outside of you is chaos. It wasn't long before I discovered Epictetus, the former slave turned philosopher. His teachings were sharp sometimes, even harsh, but honest in a way that cut through my excuses. It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things. Again I paused. How much of my suffering was self-inflicted? How many of my thoughts were distorted interpretations, not truths? Then came Seneca with his letters gentle, probing, precise. He seemed like someone trying to save a friend from drowning in their own mind. One line in particular grabbed me by the throat. We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality. That was me. I was living in fear of losing the company, of being seen as a failure, of being left alone. But none of that had actually happened yet. I was being destroyed by what might happen. And suddenly, I realized I wasn't just facing external challenges. I was also facing an internal crisis of meaning. I had wrapped my identity so tightly around being a founder, a husband, a high achiever, that when those things started to crack, so did I. But here were men, Marcus Epictetus Seneca, who faced worse and still found a way to live with purpose. Not because life got easier, but because they got stronger. It wasn't about removing pain. It was about removing the belief that pain equals defeat. That realization was sobering, but also liberating. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I opened Meditations again and read just one passage. I sat with it. I didn't rush into my inbox. I didn't panic over Slack notifications. I just breathed. Then I opened a new document and wrote my own thoughts, trying to be honest like Marcus was. Not performative, not pretty. Just real. And I ended it with a question I now ask myself every day. What is mine to control today? Not the market, not my wife's feelings, not the reaction of investors, just my actions, my words, my judgments. That first week I did this every morning. 5 minutes, a quote, a reflection, a question. And something began to shift. Not outside, not yet, but within. I noticed my breathing slowed when stress came. I noticed I paused more before reacting. I noticed I started saying no to things that drained me and yes to things that grounded me, even simple things like taking a walk or making a meal with attention instead of haste. The Stoics weren't giving me a way out. They were giving me a way through. One day I printed out the Serenity Prayer, not because I'm religious, but because it aligned perfectly with what the Stoics preached. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. It became a second mantra, a filter. Every problem I faced went through it. Is this within my control? No, then accept it. Is this within my control? Yes, then act on it. Can I tell the difference? That's the practice. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a rebirth. But it was the beginning of something stable, something honest or discipline. And that's what Stoicism is at its core. It's not cold detachment, it's not repression, it's a daily courageous choice to show up, not because life is easy, but because you've decided to meet it with strength. The day I found Stoicism, I didn't become a different person, but I began the process of becoming someone better, someone grounded. And for the first time in a long time, I believed I could trust myself again. I used to believe that if I just worked hard enough, planned well enough, pushed myself far enough, I could control the outcome. That's what we're taught, right? Hustle harder, never quit, control the narrative, dominate your space. But life doesn't care about your narrative, and it certainly doesn't follow your roadmap. I learned that the hard way. My startup had been my identity. Every meeting, every line of code, every pitch deck, it was personal. It had to succeed, not just for me, but for everyone I felt responsible for: my co-founder, our employees, our early believers. My marriage ran on a similar fuel effort. I thought if I could just do enough love, well enough support, hard enough, fix things fast enough, it would all stay together. But it didn't. And when it all started slipping through my fingers, when the funding dried up and the conversations at home grew shorter and colder, I didn't know how to handle it. I fought, I clung, I panicked. I tried to control what I couldn't. And that's when I truly started to understand one of the most important Stoic teachings, the dichotomy of control. Epictetus laid it out clearly. Some things are in our control and others are not. It sounds simple, obvious even, but it's not. Because most of us spend our lives obsessing over what isn't ours, to command other people's opinions, market trends, outcomes, emotions that don't belong to us. I made a list that week. 2 columns. On the left, what I can control. On the right, what I can't. My thoughts, my actions, my effort, my words, my values. Those went on the left. My wife's feelings, investor decisions, economic conditions, the past, the future. That all went on the right. The truth, the right column, was where 90% of my energy had been going. It was like trying to sail against the wind by yelling at the ocean, so I stopped. Or rather, I tried to stop because unlearning is hard. It's not like flipping a switch. But I began to catch myself. When I noticed myself spiraling over an unanswered email or a comment someone made, I'd pause and ask, is this mine to control? If the answer was no, I let it go. Or at least I worked on letting it go. At first it felt like giving up, like surrender. But over time I saw it for what it was, freedom. Because when you stop wasting energy on what you can't control, you finally have the strength to focus on what you can. I started showing up differently. Not because I knew things would work out, but because I had accepted that I didn't have to know. I just had to do my part. If I prepared for a pitch, I gave it my full attention. But once I walked out of that Zoom call, I let go of the outcome. If I spoke to my wife, I tried to speak with kindness and honesty. But I stopped trying to manipulate her response. And in doing that, I found something radical peace. Not bliss, not joy, but peace, the calm that comes when your effort aligns with reality. There's a metaphor I love from the Stoics. They say life is like being an archer. You draw your bow aim with care and release. That's your part. But once the arrow leaves your fingers, the result is out of your hands. A gust of wind, a shift in the target, a sudden noise, anything could throw it off. And if you judge yourself by whether or not the arrow hits, you're enslaved by things you don't control. But if you judge yourself by how you aimed, by your practice, your focus, your discipline, then no matter what happens, you win. Because you did what was yours to do. That changed everything for me. I started focusing on process over results, on effort over outcome, on showing up even when I didn't feel like it, because showing up was mine. Success not guaranteed, praise not up to me. But showing up with integrity, that was always mine. And when things went wrong, and they often did, I didn't collapse as easily. Because I wasn't anchoring my worth to the result. I was anchoring it to the character I chose in the moment. There's a quiet power in that. One day, after a long string of investor rejections, I walked out of my office, took a deep breath, and said to myself out loud, I did my part. That's enough. I wasn't pretending I didn't care. I did care, but I was starting to care differently. Less about control, more about character. The Stoics taught me that true power isn't about bending the world to your will. It's about bending yourself toward what is good, no matter how the world shifts. There are still days when I slip, when I obsess, overthink, reach for control like it's oxygen. But I catch it faster now. I bring it back to that question. Is this mine to control? If yes, I act. If no, I let go. And little by little, that practice became a habit. That habit became a mindset. That mindset became a way of living that didn't just help me survive. It helped me become someone I respected again. Someone calm, steady, present. And in the chaos of startup life, of life in general, that's more valuable than any victory I was chasing before. I used to resist everything I didn't like. Pain, rejection, failure, uncertainty. If it wasn't in line with what I wanted, I fought it internally constantly. I would argue with reality as if clenching my jaw tighter could somehow undo the facts, but it never worked. Resentment didn't change outcomes, it only deepened my suffering. That's when I encountered a concept that felt so radically foreign at first that I almost dismissed it: amor fati. The phrase translates to love of fate. Not tolerance, not endurance, love. The idea is simple but brutal. Whatever happens, embrace it not reluctantly but wholeheartedly. Love not just the good but also the hardship, the loss, the chaos. Love what is. I remember the first time I read those words, I actually shook my head. Love this breakdown, this crumbling marriage, this sense of failure. Why would anyone love that? But as I read deeper, especially into Nietzsche's writings on amor fati, and how the Stoics like Marcus Aurelius echoed the same spirit, it began to make sense. Not in an idealistic way, but in a deeply practical one. A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it. Marcus Aurelius, that line struck me. The fire doesn't discriminate. It doesn't say, I only want dry wood. It consumes everything. And in doing so, it shines. Could I do that? Could I turn the betrayal, the loss, the fear into fuel? Could I learn to not just accept what happens to me, but use it? So I tried. When another investor pulled out unexpectedly, I didn't spiral. I asked, what is this teaching me about resilience? When my wife and I had another difficult conversation, one that hinted we might not find our way back, I didn't resist the pain. I let it in. I said, this too is part of the path. It felt unnatural at first, but something shifted. I began to see my struggles not as interruptions, but as invitations. Invitations to grow, to get stronger, to become wiser. Not in spite of the circumstances, but because of them. Amor fati doesn't mean passivity. It doesn't mean you stop fighting for what matters. It means you stop wasting energy fighting the fact that life includes loss, that people will leave, that plans will fail, that nothing is guaranteed. And in that letting go, a strange freedom emerged. I wasn't walking around pretending everything was amazing, but I was walking with my head higher. I was learning to say, yes, this is hard. Yes, I didn't want this. But I accept it fully and I will make it part of who I become. Viktor Frankl, who endured the unimaginable, said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. That's amor fati. That's the fire. Not gritting your teeth, but opening your arms. I started journaling each night with a question. What happened today that I didn't want, but that I now choose to embrace? Some days it was small. A rejection email, a meeting that fell through. Other days it was heavier. Another blow to the relationship. Another reminder of financial fragility. But every entry told me the same thing. Life doesn't owe me comfort. It offers me growth. Not in spite of the pain, through it. One morning, I woke up to find a note from my wife. She'd gone to stay with a friend for a while. No accusations, no anger, just space. I sat on the couch, holding the note, the silence wrapping around me like a cold blanket. Old me would have fought it, raged against the unfairness, blamed myself, or blamed her. Instead, I just sat with it. I let the moment be what it was, reality. And I whispered almost like a prayer, amor fati. This is part of it. Let's see who I can become now. It wasn't a magic spell. It didn't make the loneliness disappear. But it grounded me. It reminded me that I still had power, maybe not over the situation, but over how I carried it. Amor fati taught me that nothing is wasted. Not even heartbreak, not even failure. If you live with intention, if you show up with courage, every chapter becomes part of your becoming. Even the ones you wouldn't have chosen, especially those. There's a peace that comes from loving fate, not for what it gives, but for what it teaches. And if I could learn to love this season of unraveling, of not knowing, of starting over, then maybe I could learn to love all of it. Because this tangled, imperfect, difficult life is mine. And I'm learning to love it as it is not as I wish it were. For most of my life, I lived either in the rearview mirror or somewhere just out of reach on the horizon. I replayed conversations that had already ended, rare indecisions like film reels I could edit if I just obsessed long enough. Or I chased imaginary futures versions of success that might redeem the pain, fix the cracks, or finally earn the peace I thought I didn't deserve until I had done more. The present moment, it was always a bridge, never a destination. But living like that past, haunted future, hungry is exhausting, and it's empty. Because the only thing you ever actually have is right now. This breath, this step, this decision. And I never truly understood that until I read this from Marcus Aurelius. Confine yourself to the present. Not as advice, but as a command, a reminder, a lifeline. The Stoics weren't vague about this. Again and again they came back to the same truth: peace lives in the now. Not in what was, not in what might be, only in what is. I had spent so long resenting my past and fearing my future that I hadn't realized how much life I was wasting. Days blurred together because I was never really in them. I was always somewhere else. But when you've tried everything, fought, blamed, planned, panicked, and still feel like you're losing, you eventually come back to what's right in front of you. Because that's all that's left. And that's where I began to find peace. I started small. I turned off my notifications. Not forever, just for 1 hour. Then another. Then an entire morning. I made coffee slowly, as if I'd never made it before. Not because I had time to waste, but because I wanted to remind myself this moment is real. It matters. I began walking without my phone. No podcasts, no destination, just one foot in front of the other, the rhythm of my breath syncing with the movement of the world. Trees didn't rush, birds didn't worry. Why did I hope I began asking myself a simple question throughout the day. What is enough right now? Not tomorrow, not 5 years from now, right now. Most of the time, the answer was this. This is enough. This breath, this effort, this meal, this moment of stillness. It's not that my problems vanished. The company still struggled. My marriage still hung in limbo. But I wasn't constantly dragging those problems into the now unless I was actively working on them. Otherwise, they stayed where they belonged in their own time. The more I practiced this, the more present I became. And the more present I became, the more clarity I found. Because here's the thing. In the present, fear loses its grip. Regret doesn't echo as loud. And anxiety has nowhere to hide. When I was truly in the moment, fully inhabiting it, there wasn't room for despair. There was only life as it was. And it was enough. Epictetus said, "Do not seek to have events happen as you want them to, but instead want them to happen as they do. Then your life will flow well." That idea terrified me at first. Want things as they are, accept this mess. But I wasn't being asked to approve of everything. I was being asked to be here, fully. To meet life where it was, not where I imagined it should be. And once I did that, I began to notice beauty again. Subtle things. The way light spilled across my desk in the late afternoon. The way my hands felt wrapping around a warm mug. The sound of my own breath, steady and calm. I started to remember that the present isn't just what we endure while we wait for the real part to start. This is the real part. The moment your child laughs. The moment your friend listens without judgment. The moment you keep a promise to yourself. That's it. That's life. I stopped needing every moment to be meaningful. I just let moments be. And somehow that made them meaningful. Sometimes I'd sit on the floor, back against the wall, eyes closed, and say quietly, right now, nothing is wrong. It wasn't always true in the larger sense, but often it was true enough, and that was all I needed. The future still came, of course, and the past still knocked, but I didn't let them move in. I gave them a nod, then returned to the moment I was in, the only one I could actually live. And the strange thing, the more I did it, that the more capable I became of handling everything else, because I wasn't fractured. I wasn't lost in places I couldn't control. I was here, whole. The present moment didn't fix my life, but it anchored me in it. And sometimes, when the chaos returned, and it always did, I would come back to this quiet mantra. This moment is enough, even if it's uncertain, even if it's painful, even if it's simple. It's enough, because I am enough right here as I am. And from that place, I began to rebuild. There's a place inside you that no one can touch. Not failure, not betrayal, not even loss. It took me nearly losing everything to discover it. The Stoics called it the inner citadel, a fortress of character and clarity within the self. Marcus Aurelius referred to it as a space untouched by the world's chaos, a core that remains intact even when everything around you falls apart. At first, I didn't believe in such a place. I felt too exposed, too raw. Everything hurt, words pierced, silence crushed. Even small things, a look at tone, a delay in a message, could shatter me. But that's the thing about emotional pain. It convinces you that you're defenseless. It tricks you into thinking your identity lives in fragile things, your job, your relationship, your bank balance, your reputation. I had built my sense of self on external scaffolding. My startup was my purpose. My marriage was my validation. My future plans were my comfort. And when they all began to crumble, I didn't just lose those things, I lost me, or so I thought. Because beneath the collapse, something remained. A small, quiet voice, a sliver of stillness. Not hope, not optimism, just presence. And it said, "You are still here." That voice wasn't dramatic. It didn't offer solutions. It simply reminded me of a deeper truth that who I am is not defined by what happens to me, but how I respond. That my true strength was not in controlling outcomes, but in keeping my character intact regardless of them. Epictetus wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." The inner citadel is that mastery not over the world, but over the self. It's not about being emotionless, it's about being anchored. Unshakable not because nothing moves you, but because you know where to return when the storm hits. I remember one evening, shortly after another failed funding round, sitting on my apartment floor with a legal pad. I wasn't journaling for reflection. I was writing a defense, a literal internal argument with myself. On one side, the panic voice. You're done. No one believes in you. You're wasting your time. You're alone. On the other, the citadel voice. You have survived worse. Your value is not dependent on their money. You are capable of enduring this. I kept writing until the panic softened, until I found stillness, until I could breathe without choking on fear. That exercise became a daily ritual. Every time the world shook, I returned to the citadel. I reminded myself that courage, discipline, and wisdom were mine to guard. That no investor, no argument, no bad day could take that away from me. And here's what surprised me: most people noticed. Not because I suddenly looked successful, but because I looked calm. I listened more, reacted less. There was a quiet in me that others felt, even if they couldn't name it. That calm didn't come from denial. It came from building walls inside, not to shut the world out, but to protect the part of me that mattered most. Seneca wrote, "You may be banished, your property confiscated, your home destroyed, yet no one can lay hands on your character." When I read that, I underlined it 3 times because that was my life. I wasn't being banished, but it felt like it. I wasn't being physically robbed, but everything I had invested in emotionally, professionally, was slipping away. And yet I still had the power to be honest, to be kind, to show up, to carry myself with integrity. That realization was the cornerstone of my inner citadel. So I started building, brick by brick. Every time I resisted the urge to lash out in frustration, I laid a stone. Every time I took responsibility for my part in the mess, I reinforced the walls. Every time I chose to act according to my values, even when no one else was watching, I fortified the foundation. It wasn't about perfection, it was about protection. Not from pain, but from losing myself in the pain. Because the world will shake, people will leave, plans will fail. That's not pessimism, that's reality. The Stoics didn't sugarcoat life. They looked it in the eye and said, "Bring it." But they did so from within their citadel. And now I do too. One day, in the middle of a particularly hard week, I wrote this on a sticky note and taped it to my mirror. Whatever happens today, I will not betray myself. That's what the citadel is. It's where you go to remember who you are when everything else is trying to make you forget. It's not built in a day, and it's never finished. But every small act of self-mastery adds to its strength. And now, when the panic voice returns, and it always does, I don't argue. I don't run. I simply return to that space within where my thoughts are my own and says, I am still here and I am still me. Pain I once believed was pointless. When my marriage began to erode quietly then all at once, it felt like failure. When my startup lost its lifeblood cash confidence momentum, it felt like humiliation. And when I could barely get out of bed, haunted by exhaustion I couldn't explain, it felt like defeat. Why me? Why now? What for? But Stoicism doesn't ask why me. It asks, what will you do with this? That shift in questioning changed everything. Viktor Frankl, a man who endured the depths of human suffering in concentration camps, wrote, "In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering. At the moment, it finds a meaning." The Stoics weren't far off. They believed hardship was not a detour, but the very road to virtue. Without adversity, how do you know if your courage is real? Without loss, how do you discover what truly matters? I began to wonder, what if this pain isn't punishment, but raw material? What if suffering isn't just something to survive, but something to shape me? And that's when the transformation began. At first I wanted the pain to go away. Who doesn't? I wanted the marriage to snap back into place. I wanted my company to find its miracle. I wanted to feel like myself again. But slowly I stopped waiting for relief and started listening for insight. The long, lonely evenings, once soaked in dread, became time for reading, reflecting, and writing. I filled pages with fears, yes, but also with truths. I had ignored how much I had tied my self-worth to outcomes, how little I had cared for my health, how I had lost the ability to be still. The silence taught me, the suffering taught me. I began to use my pain as a mirror. Not to shame myself, but to see myself. What kind of man do I want to be when things are falling apart? Resentful, bitter, or present, honest and grounded. I didn't always like what I saw. But I chose to keep looking, because clarity, real clarity, only comes when you stop looking away. There's a concept in Stoicism I clung to during those months, sympatheia, the interconnectedness of all things. The belief that life doesn't happen to us, it happens for the whole. That even the hardest seasons serve a larger fabric. I didn't have to understand it. I just had to trust that nothing was wasted, not even heartbreak. So I started reframing everything. Every argument with my wife, a chance to practice patience. Every lost deal, a test of perseverance. Every anxious morning, an invitation to return to the breath, the present, the truth. It wasn't easy. Sometimes I failed. Sometimes I cursed the process. But I kept returning. And over time I noticed something miraculous. The pain didn't disappear, but it began to carry weight. Not like a burden, but like meaning. I realized I could use it. That I could take the most broken pieces of my life and forge something with them. A clearer vision of who I was. a deeper compassion for others, a stronger trust in the man I was becoming. The suffering became sacred, not in the romantic sense, but in the necessary one. Like fire that purifies metal, like pressure that forms stone. Seneca said, difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. And I started to believe that maybe this period wasn't about losing myself, it was about forging myself. One night I was walking alone through the city, the kind of quiet walk that invites memory. I passed the coffee shop where my wife and I used to go. For a second, grief washed over me like a wave. But then just as quickly gratitude followed. Not for the pain, but for what the pain had revealed. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't running. I was present. I was facing everything. And I saw it clearly. My suffering had taught me more about peace than my comfort ever did. So now when I look back at that season of collapse, the financial panic, the emotional wreckage, the lonely mornings, I don't see shame. I see the furnace that formed me. I see the wound that became the doorway. And when people ask me now, how did you get through it? I tell them the truth. I didn't escape it. I entered it fully, honestly. And I found something in there I never expected myself. Not the version of me that had it all together. The real version, flawed, frightened, but steady. And that's what Stoicism gave me. Not immunity from pain, but the invitation to make it meaningful. I used to live for the applause. It wasn't always obvious. I didn't crave praise in a loud or flashy way. I wasn't the type to show off or demand attention. But deep down, I needed to be seen a certain way. Competent, put together, reliable. The founder with a vision. The husband who always knew what to say. The guy who kept it all under control. And when that image started to crack, I panicked. Not just because things were going wrong, but because I was terrified of what people might think. What if they knew I was struggling? What if they thought I failed? What if they saw the chaos behind the curtain? That fear drove me more than I'd like to admit. I stayed in conversations too long. I took on projects I couldn't handle. I said I'm good when I wasn't even close. All to preserve an illusion. But Stoicism doesn't care about illusions. One of the most piercing truths I encountered in my reading was this from Marcus Aurelius. Ambition means tying your well-being to what other people say or do. Sanity means tying it to your own actions. At first I didn't want to admit it, but I had been tying my entire emotional life to the opinions of others. Their reactions were the barometer for my worth. If they liked me, I felt good. If they disapproved, even silently, I felt hollow. That's not freedom. That's slavery. The kind where the chains are invisible, but the weight is real. So I started asking the harder question, what if I stopped needing their approval? Not stopped caring completely, I'm human. But stopped needing it. Stopped giving it power over my self-worth. That's when I realized how much of my life was shaped by performance. The pitch calls where I spoke with confidence while feeling terrified. The conversations where I downplayed my burnout just to keep the image alive. Even my marriage had become in part a performance of strength, of certainty, of emotional availability I didn't always have. So I began to dismantle it, slowly, intentionally. One of the first things I did was say, I don't know, in a meeting. It seems small, right? But to a founder who built his identity on competence, saying, I don't know, felt like stripping armor off in a battlefield. And yet, the moment I said it out loud without apology, I felt lighter. No one mocked me. The world didn't fall apart. And more importantly, I didn't fall apart. That was the beginning. Then came honesty with my team. I told them I was struggling, not in some melodramatic way, but plainly. I told them I wasn't sure how things would play out, but that I was committed to showing up with clarity and integrity. The result, they didn't lose trust. They gained it. Because people don't need perfection, they need presence, they need truth. And most of all, I needed truth. I started showing up in life not as who I thought I had to be, but as who I actually was. Some days that was someone who was tired, or uncertain, or even afraid. But it was real, and real was enough. Seneca wrote, "You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire." I realized that my desire for approval was in a way a form of arrogance. I wanted to be above judgment. I wanted everyone to like me, to validate me, to see me as capable. But no one gets that, not even emperors. So why did I think I was entitled to it? That question humbled me, and it freed me. Because once I let go of the need to be impressive, I became something more valuable, authentic. I remember the first dinner with a friend where I admitted I was thinking of shutting the company down. He looked at me, not with pity, but with respect, and said, "Honestly, man, I'm surprised you've kept going this long." That wasn't an insult. That was real recognition. Not for the mask I wore, but for the battle I fought. And in that moment, I felt more seen than I ever had, standing on a stage or pitching a deck. Approval is fickle. It rises and falls like the market. But character that's steady? Now, when I feel the pull to prove myself, I pause. I ask, who am I trying to impress and why? If the answer is anyone other than my own inner compass, I recalibrate. Because the compass, the one built on courage, discipline, wisdom, and justice, is the only true guide. And here's the paradox. The less I tried to be impressive, the more people trusted me. The more I stopped seeking applause, the more peace I found in silence. So no, I don't need everyone to like me. I need to like who I am when no one's watching. That's the freedom Stoicism gave me. Not to be indifferent, but to be independent. And that at last is enough. The biggest mistake people make when they first discover Stoicism is thinking it's an answer, like a solution, a fix, a pill you take once, and suddenly you're calm, wise, unshakable. I know because I made the mistake myself. After reading meditations, after journaling, after finally feeling like I could breathe again, I thought, this is it. I've made it. I'm different now. But then the next day came, and so did a nasty email from a client, and a tense conversation with my wife, and the moment where I doubted everything again. And suddenly I found myself right back in the storm. That's when I realized something essential. Stoicism isn't a one-time revelation. It's a discipline. It's not something you read once and understand. It's something you practice every day, especially on the days when you don't want to. There's a reason Epictetus said, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. Because philosophy is not about how much you know, it's about what you do when things get hard. For me, the moment that solidified this was a morning I overslept after a night of stress eating and scrolling on my phone in bed. I woke up groggy, guilty, and annoyed with myself. Old me would have spiraled, called it a failure, written the day off, felt ashamed. But that morning I did something different. I got up, sat at my desk, opened my journal, and wrote, "Start again. Today is enough. Do what's yours to do." That's practice, not perfection, just starting again. Some days, practice looked like journaling. Other days, it looked like biting my tongue in a heated meeting. Sometimes it was pausing to breathe before replying to a text. Sometimes it was turning off my phone when my mind was racing. None of it looked heroic, but all of it mattered, because Stoicism is a way of being, not occasionally, consistently. That's the hard part and the beautiful part. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." I pinned that above my desk. It reminded me that this wasn't about becoming some idealized version of myself. It was about doing the work every day, quietly even when no one noticed, especially then. And I started to notice something. The more I practiced, the less reactive I became. I didn't explode when things went wrong. I didn't collapse every time someone disappointed me. I began to respond, not just react. It wasn't always graceful. I still snapped, still doubted, still had nights where I curled into myself and questioned everything. But I kept showing up. That's what Stoicism taught me. Discipline doesn't mean never falling. It means getting back up and doing the work again without drama, without self-pity. The gym taught me this too. You don't get strong by lifting once. You don't build muscle by thinking about it. You get under the weight every day. You sweat. You fail reps. You get sore. You come back anyway. Philosophy is no different. Every day is training. Every challenge is a set. Every reaction is a rep. And if you don't train your mind, the world will do it for you. And it doesn't care about your peace. So I built rituals. Morning reading, 1 page from meditations, letters from a Stoic or Frankl. Journaling 1, reflection 1 question, 1 intention. Evening check-in, where did I act out of fear today? Where did I show up with courage? Sometimes these practices were 5 minutes, sometimes longer. But I kept them non-negotiable. Because like brushing your teeth, their power isn't in any single instance, it's in their accumulation. Over time, this repetition created something stronger than motivation. It created identity. I stopped thinking of Stoicism as a thing I did and began thinking of it as who I was becoming. And slowly, I felt myself harden. Not in a cold way, but like steel. Not brittle, not unfeeling, just tempered. That doesn't mean I stopped needing practice. It means I stopped expecting life to get easier. And I started trusting that I would get better at meeting it. There is a quote I wrote on the first page of a new journal. You don't rise to the level of your expectations. You fall to the level of your training. So I train daily, quietly, without expecting applause. And when the world gets loud again, and it always does, I have something to return to. My breath, my principles, my practice, not to escape life, but to meet it. With steadiness, with grace, with courage. One day, one decision at a time. There comes a point after the fire, after the storm, after the collapse, when you're standing in the ashes and the question arises, now what? For months I was focused on survival. Getting through the emotional wreckage. Finding the ground again. Reclaiming my breath, my mind, my presence. But then came the strange quiet space that follows healing. The silence not of despair, but of potential. I remember staring at a whiteboard in my apartment one night, clean, empty, a symbol of everything I hadn't planned for. There was no roadmap anymore. The marriage was still distant. The business was no longer on fire, but it wasn't thriving either. I had no certainty, only space. And in that space, I asked myself if I could build again, not just a business, but a life. What would I build it on? Because the foundation I had built everything on before status achievement, external validation, it hadn't held. It cracked under pressure. It couldn't weather life's weight. So I started sketching something different. Not strategy, not a 5-year plan, but principles. I took a page from the Stoics from Marcus Seneca Epictetus. What mattered was not the shape of my life, but the strength of its core. And that core would be built on virtue, not as a buzzword, as a framework. Courage, temperance, justice, wisdom. 4 cornerstones, unshakable, unimpressed by trends or titles or quarterly projections. I asked myself, what would it look like to build a life rooted in these? To make decisions not based on ambition or fear, but on character. So I tried. I rebuilt my company not from a place of urgency, but of service. What problem was I solving? Who was I helping? Could I do it with honesty and integrity? That meant letting go of some opportunities that looked good on paper, but required compromise in principle. It meant reimagining success not as scale, but as alignment. Every hire, every product, decision, every investor, conversation I filtered through a new lens. Is this good? Is this right? Is this who I want to be? That clarity didn't make things easier. In fact, it made some things harder, but it made them truer. And the strange thing is, people responded. Clients respected the honesty. My team felt steadier. Conversations became more grounded, less performative. Even my marriage, though still uncertain, softened. We spoke differently, less like people trying to win, more like people trying to understand. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was trying to live rightly. Seneca said, "A good character, when established, becomes a rule of life." That rule guided me through ambiguity, through risk, through loneliness. And in the spaces where I used to chase approval or certainty, I found something richer: self-respect. I didn't need everything to work out. I just needed to be proud of how I showed up. The fear of starting over never fully goes away. But when you build on virtue, you know that even if you lose the structure again, the foundation will remain, because the real architecture is within you. And so I kept building, not with urgency but with intent. I created quiet in my calendar. I wrote without a goal. I helped someone without needing credit. I said no without guilt. I walked away from things that glittered but didn't glow. And brick by brick, a new life took shape. One evening, months into this rebuilding, I found an old notebook from a year prior. The pages were frantic, filled with to-do lists, financial projections, motivational quotes scrawled in desperation. I barely recognized the handwriting. I sat for a long time holding that notebook. Not with judgment, with gratitude. That version of me did the best he could. But he was building on sand. Now I was building on stone. And that stone was formed from disciplined truth and the decision over and over to act with integrity even when it was inconvenient. Especially then. There was no finish line, no moment of arrival, just one more chance each day to lay another brick. And so each morning I asked myself, am I being honest? Am I acting with courage? Am I doing what's right, even when no one sees it? If the answer was yes, then the day was a success. Not because it was productive, because it was principled. Stoicism taught me that it's not the size of what you build that matters. It's how you build it and why. So I rebuilt not a version of my old life, but something more grounded, more real, more mine. And in doing so, I stopped fearing collapse. Because I knew no matter what happened, I could start again. And I would know exactly where to begin. Right here, right now, on the foundation of who I've chosen to become. Let me be clear about something. My life isn't perfect now. The marriage didn't magically heal. The business didn't suddenly explode in success. I don't wake up every day bursting with purpose and clarity. I still face uncertainty. I still get anxious. I still sit alone some evenings feeling the ache of all that's been lost and all that's still unknown. But here's what's different. I'm not drowning anymore. I stand in the same storm, but I stand still. Because I've learned that peace isn't found in the absence of struggle. It's found in the posture you hold within the struggle. That's what Stoicism gave me. Not escape, not armor. Anchoring. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved, and the raging of the sea falls still around it." I used to think strength was about control. Controlling my business, my image, my emotions, other people's reactions. But that kind of strength is brittle. It breaks under pressure. Now I understand strength differently. Strength is the quiet resolve to remain rooted in your values, even when everything around you is chaos. I don't control what happens next. I don't know how the next investor call will go. I don't know where my marriage will land. I don't know what the next year holds. But I do know how I will face it. Calmly, deliberately, with courage. Because I've trained for this. I've built the inner muscle. I've returned to my breath again and again until it became a sanctuary. There are moments still when the old panic creeps in the whisper that says, I haven't done enough, that I'm falling behind, that I'm alone. But now I don't run from that voice. I meet it. And I say, you don't decide who I am, I do. That's the real power. That's the freedom Stoicism offers. Not immunity from pain, but resilience. Not detachment, but clarity. Every day I recommit. Every morning I wake up and choose to live by principle, not pressure. Some days that means saying no to something tempting but misaligned. Other days it means pushing through discomfort to do what's right. Sometimes it means forgiving myself for slipping, because perfection was never the goal. Progress was. And here's the part no one tells you. It's not just that Stoicism helps you endure the hard things. It actually helps you savor the good ones too. When I sit with a friend and laugh, not to distract myself, but to simply be, that's presence. When I finish a long day of honest work, not for glory, but because it needed to be done, that's purpose. When I walk into a room without needing to be impressive, just authentic, that's peace. And when I lie down at night and can say, I live today with intention, that's enough. Because that's the goal, right? Not to impress, not to dominate, not to win every battle. Just to be steady in the storm. Just to live with dignity. I remember a moment recently, simple but profound. I was walking home, rain falling, no umbrella. A year ago, I would have cursed the sky, complained, worried about the meetings I was late for. But this time, I just walked. Slowly. Let the rain soak in. And I thought this too is life. And I am not afraid of it. That's the measure of transformation. Not in titles, not in outcomes, but in how you meet the ordinary moments, the uncomfortable, the uncertain, the quietly beautiful, and choose to stand still. So no, I haven't escaped the storm, but I have found my footing, and in that stillness I have discovered a version of myself I never knew I was looking for, not invincible, but grounded, not always certain, but always present, not always winning, but always true. And for the first time in a long time, that's more than enough. That's peace, that's power. That's who I am now.